Hey everybody, Pronago here, bringing you another cast over Krankendau versus ArbuzBudesh. We are one game into the set with ArbuzBudesh closing in on a total victory in the two-game set we have here, but Krankendau might be able to fight back yet. It's Zerg versus Protoss on Blackwater Bastion, a map by BiddyB. We've got our maroon Zerg, Krankendau in the top left here. Indeed, he is maroon, and down here in the bottom right, I'm going to call this one Japanese Violet? No, it's dark lavender. Okay. And it's ArbuzBudesh in the bottom right as Protoss. So, Cosmonarchy. I mean, I guess the colors all the time. That's because we have over 100 of them, and you too can choose which ones you want. And basically a preference system. And for example, if Krankendau and Arbuz were to select the same color, then one of them would get it, and the other one would have to kick rocks, as they say. So we even have handling for that. Check that out. But Cosmonarchy is a very different game than Starcraft 1, yet it is so evocative of it. In fact, built upon the Brood War engine, but with fancy ramps that actually respect your visual cortex, but also have totally accurate tile flags. Can you believe that? Yes, indeed, we are no longer limited by what Blizzard left us. We have entered into the information age, you could say. That being said, Krankendau is probably going to be going for his patented Larvosk first. It's a gas-heavy opener that gives you extra production as Zerg, and he is indeed down in the set of games. But Arbuz, he's been an Ecclesiast spammer, He's been a man who loves to break out the 3-gate and really just try to muscle down Zerg in the early stages of the game. We're seeing little bits and bobs of that. I should point out that this game is almost a month old now, actually. Maybe a little bit more than that, even. As we are talking about a game that was in... we were talking about a game that is in that was played in June 14th. So, yes, indeed, you are playing Cosmonarchy, Krankendau. I think he might have gotten lost somewhere along the way. And forgot to send his secondary worker scout. Maybe that's what he was talking about there. In any event... oh, I see. He canceled a worker at some point. He was making double Kagrant. I totally missed that. Don't worry, Krankendau. If you didn't stop to talk about it, then I would never have noticed, and Arbuz definitely would not have noticed either. As you can see, this community, the players that we have here are pretty funny, pretty cool, pretty chill. Nice to be around. So if you want to join us on Discord, you can partake in a project that has over 50 units, rather about 50 units per race. Can you believe that? I think technically Terran does have over 50 units. The other races are getting there. We got some more pending for Protoss, and Zerg is pretty close to being complete, actually. Just like one or two that I need to slap together at some point. Arbuz will find his opponent, and a little bit later than Krankendau, but he is going to be able to escape with all of his workers. So this is an interesting little permutation. Sometimes Protosses will go for Hierophants first, and that does give you access to a lot of, early movement and tempo, and you can usually kill your opponent's worker scout. But because that's not going to be the case here, Krankendau will be able to escape with all of his workers as he plans to take an expansion, I believe, with this worker here. Yep, I'm going to go ahead and use that for a little bit of efficiency boost as he takes his natural. So the Larvosk does give you access to extra larva, as you might imagine. It's the same exact rate of production as a Hatcherosk, so you don't have to worry about trying to remember different kinds of timings or anything like that for the different structures. And now with the third hatch, or the third larva production, I should say, coming up for Krankendau, he will be able to posture somewhat aggressively. Basically, one of the things that we tried to do, as he, obviously Krankendau is going to be shooing away from coming in here. Oh, he was thinking about running by and maybe going for a scout, and he would have actually seen 2-gate Lattice as the opener here for Arbuz. A bit of a different one, but vassals will soon reveal themselves anyway. It's just Zeths right now being made to move across the map. And one of the things we try to do from a design standpoint for Cosmonarchy is that since we remove things like supply and upgrades, we removed these little things that, basically are not very interactive at the end of the day, right? Like you think about upgrades, you get them, and then you have them forever. There's not really any conditionality to them. There's not really any locality to them. And speaking of locale, Arbuz is about to lose this Ecclesiast, not realizing that the Zets are coming on in, and even though Krankendau took a sweet time picking that unit, he's going to take that. He'll take that for a trade for Ecclesiast, which is 50 of each resource, to a single Zethar core, which is only 25 minerals, obviously. So happy about that. But yes, we do indeed have lots and lots of sort of systems in place where, if you think about it from the standpoint of okay, since we're trying to add a lot of units and we're removing upgrades, so the units themselves can kind of be perceived as upgrades, either because they provide some sort of utility or aura or buff or debuff that helps other units find their footing even better. So you can kind of think about it as like a positional upgrade to an existing unit, or they are an upgrade over an existing unit that you make instead of once you get to a higher tier. Stuff like that, right? Can definitely happen. So that's basically what we can see out of the design of Cosmonarchy. But the other thing that we can see there is basically there's a lot of extra systems, right? You think about how like Terrans can build a secondary town center. That's not something that exists by default. You think about how Zerg can build extra larva production, and you think about how Arbuz can flank the workers in the natural while losing his whole ground force to all of the Quaseth units that have been made. So even though a lot of dead ground units exist here, Krankendau could just decide to pull the trigger. I mean, he doesn't really, he loses a worker trying to make the spray. He's kind of panicking over in the main, but he needs to pull his quasis out, and he did lose most of his deaths. He did make another round, so he can decide to pressure as the Nexus is coming on down here, but Arbuz is massacring Krankendau's workers, up by 7 workers right now, and definitely shutting down all the mining. Obviously, you get burrow as a default thing. You don't have upgrades anymore, like I mentioned, so no worries on that front. And the Zets, they're going to see if they can pile on in. I feel like Krankendau has a great opportunity to charge in here and pick off the Drakidins, maybe force a cancel on the Nexus if dire straits happen. Certainly forcing the vassals back, but he's taken his sweet time, and that might have been a little bit too much. He's going to sick onto that Nexus, but think about these open Drakidins. They're not able to do anything. He just wants to try to pick the Nexus, but it's so advanced in its production, and now I feel like he's wasted his time, so he can't pick the Drakidins either. Oh, man. Indecision striking Krankendau. We actually saw this happen when he played in the Fraud of July, one of our tournaments recently, and I actually don't know if he's going to be able to sign up in time for our next tournament because he will have to qualify into the main event if he wants to. But I thought Krankendau would be able to do pretty well, and unfortunately he was not able to do so on that event. And so one of the things that, that plagued him a lot was having the opportunity to backstab, to counterattack, to, pull the trigger on some kind of aggressive move and not doing it. But, it's not like he was getting ahead via greed either. So that's something that I'm kind of noticing as a trend. Of course, we're time traveling right now. As I mentioned, this is a game that's about a month old that I had on the backlog that I figured I would go ahead and cast. And indeed, the meta has mostly remained the same as far as like the unit stats and stuff. There hasn't been any changes to like tier 1 things or anything in the meantime. But one of the things that I am noticing out of Krankendau is that he kind of has that same tendency all this way back. Something that I hope that the next couple of times we see him live in a tournament game or anything like that, he's able to work on that. Because, of course, if you pull the trigger too fast and you would be too aggressive, that can also backfire. But it's certainly worth trying, and as Zerg, you don't mind hemorrhaging a couple of units. When you lose that many workers and lose mining for that long, you know that you've been put a little bit behind, economically speaking, and you want to go ahead and figure out exactly how much. At the very least, by attacking, you're going to be scouting a little bit. So I think from a mindset POV, it makes a lot of sense. Now, we're going to see Arbuz go up to the prostration stage. At the same time, Krankendau's unlocking the Zorkiz, right? This Vornath gave him access to a tier 1 flyer, as well as the evolved Zethar-Core, the Vorvar-Core, that applies Hidebreaker, which reduces armor by 1, and applies Ensnare, which slows movement speed and attack speed. So a pretty powerful debuff for that particular unit. Helps you catch things and keep things slow. Now, the main thing about the Zorkiz Shroud is that normally we see Krankendau try to experiment by building a lot of Lakizilisks in the sort of early stages of that mid-game, which is a bit of a mouthful of time. But, that minute from, 7 minutes to 15 minutes-ish, that's usually Lakiz City for Crank as he tries to scale it up. But he's actually made the Zorkiz Shroud, then identified that he's not really being attacked right now, and drolled up, got his worker count to north of 10 workers ahead of Arbuz. At the same time, we're talking about him banking a lot of Vespene. He has made 2 Lakiz, so he's going to spend a little bit of that gas down, but I would definitely encourage him, and if I was coaching him in this moment, to say, hey man, you're pretty close to getting that Iral Iris, that all-important tier 2 tech structure, and it looks like indeed Krankendau is listening to my time-traveling coaching, tap on the shoulder, reminding himself, what would Pronogo tell me to do right now? And you know what? Maybe I would tell you to do something really silly, but it's worth doing. It's worth doing. He's going to go ahead and order up another Lakizilisk. Oh, no, never mind. He's not listening to me whatsoever. I think maybe scouting the third base being taken has flipped a switch in his brain, and he wants to see if he can maybe go for a little bit of a different look, a different angle, and definitely something that I would caution against, because I see that Arbuz has been going for Pariahs. Pariahs absolutely shut down melee units from the Zerg, and they really kind of shrug off a lot of the quasis. Lake is in high enough numbers, can deal with a lot of things, but I feel like pariahs are pretty damn good as they are. And if you have something that deals with the vassals, then when the vassals pop, their corpses are consumed to provide a movement speed boost to nearby Protoss allies. It's actually not technically limited to the Protoss, but like in this case, they're Arbuz's vassals, so all of his allies, if this is a team game, would benefit from that. So Krankendau is going to go ahead and try to pull the trigger on the attack. He is pretty close to being able to afford that Iral Iris again. So it's not all, she wrote necessarily, but I do think he could have had that a lot sooner. Now, vassals are going to start popping, and you are going to see that little blue overlay indicating the movement speed boost. It hasn't happened to the pariahs yet, but I say that, and actually it does. And you can see just how significant that is. The pariahs standing on top of and revealing the Lekizalisks. That's a mechanic we added in Cosmonarchy that makes it so you don't need detection per se. The pariahs have started to fall, only one of them left with sub 70 HP. But look, even though most of those Lekizalisks in the back weren't in the fight, the rest of the ground army was able to basically march with impunity upon the Zerg position, putting down a lot of circuits, getting the Lakis back into defensive posture, producing 10 more. We are not going to be seeing tier 2 within that first 15-minute timing, it looks like. He does have 3 bases. He can get to a lot of Vespene early, but if he really wants to build upon this, he's going to need to be able to successfully hold this attack and probably counterattack. So I'm thinking we're going to see a lot more Vespene expenditure. I'd love to see a Hydrith then go down at this point, because you know that you're up against the wall. You're at even bases with your opponent. Even though you have the worker at lead, you don't know that you do, and you also don't know how much of a focus is being placed on that macro back at home. Now, this fight should go a little bit differently, but one of those Lakis gets shut down immediately, and the other one gets splashed to death. That pariah staying alive. Plenty more where that came from for Krankendau. He did make 10 at once a little bit earlier after losing that previous fight in the middle of the map, but he needs to actually march them somewhere on a bit of a counterattack to just try to shut down this third base. Otherwise, I do think that the advantage lies with Arbuz, and this is fully acknowledging that there is an almost 20 worker advantage for Krankendau, who has put down tier 2. But until he actually leverages that, it doesn't really matter that he's got the economic advantage in terms of worker count, because his cost efficiency of his army is going to be so far below what Arbuz has. Let's just take a look at his army and take stock of it. The pariah, frontline splash damage. Obviously getting a lot of tank value. It has lost most of its durability, so that is a little bit mediated. There is a second one in here, and a third one is just about to pop out, so that will once again be a threat. The idols dealing splash damage in a small localized area, enough to deal with Zetracors and Quasilisks alike. Then we've got the Dracodons for single target fire that will absolutely annihilate any out-of-position Lekizalisks, and with the embassy here, we will have detection for ArbuzBudesh, who will be able to actually see them without needing to, stand on top of them with the pariahs. That should additionally extend their lifespan. We have a 4th base coming for both players. When you're expanding evenly with a Zerg, that does tend to favor the Protoss. And now, actually, the worker count has gotten up and gotten even. And look at this, scaling up production. Instead of being mass gate, it's going to be rogue galleries, probably for vagrants to spend down the minerals. But you can add charlatans for a little bit of splash and getting that hallucination proc that increases the damage of your army. You can obviously go for Barghests to increase your armor penetration. You can go for a bunch of different things there. And adding a lot of static defense on the high ground up here is going to allow a pretty secure 3 o'clock position for Arbuz. You're going to have to commit a pretty big amount of resources. It's not going to be as simple as just doing a run by. And that does mean that Krankendau is going to have to leverage his tier 2. Now, he is getting that Calcure Lake, so I do think, with the Hydrith Den as well, if he can get Tethzoracors up in time, which is going to require the upgraded Den, this is the upgraded pool right here. He's actually double upgraded it, if you think about it, because he went for the optional upgrade of the Vornath Pond earlier to unlock those winged Zerglings, right, the Vorvikor, and, of course, the Nathakor, which we didn't end up seeing here. We got more pariahs. We got the rogue galleries finishing up here. We got Arbuz starting to saturate his 4th base. And of course, he's going to saturate it, I would say, slower than his opponent. But look, the worker counts are still pretty even at this point. So Krankendau not really being meaningfully ahead, but he is starting to harvest Vespene from 12 o'clock. So he's finally scaling up a little bit faster in terms of that expansion count. More defenses, including an engram for splash damage and crowd control. That is absolutely phenomenal here as far as a setup for Arbuz. I'd love to see like at least 1 or 2 matrices, because I do think that that really does significantly improve the defensibility and the survivability of your static defense block, as well as any units that are in the position, because every time the matrix attacks, it releases a pulse of shield healing around it and its victim. So you can think about benefiting versus melee, benefiting when you have zealots or something like that on the front lines. and also, of course, shielding and shield healing, specifically the other units. Now, Arbuz's army is a little bit out of position here, and not in the best of a spot for accepting Krankendau's incoming aggression, but most of his army is kind of split. He's got like 3 different crowds of an army over here, and Arbuz is happy to just sort of walk around it. You can see 6 o'clock being taken, and the Zephyr Corps spotting that out, killing the worker irresponsible. That does mean that that base will require a worker transfer in order to be, have pylons put down to defend it, right? So as a result, that is a consequential kill, not as consequential as when, you think about like TVP and a Vulture snipes a probe in Starcraft 1. It's kind of like that, but not as good here because the Nexus did end up going down. Now, Krankendau has not set his sights on any additional bases, but he does have the Tetzoricors coming, and a pretty big flank with all the Lakes. He needs to get those burrowed so he can start descending spine after spine on the Protoss army. It's almost a full, total surround as the Lyrilisks charge forward to bounce, and I do think that Arbuz has been routed. He is going to need to fall away. He should end up losing that Pariah, but the armor is doing wonders for it to keep it alive. Now starting to focus down the idols for the, smaller amounts of crowd control that can happen. And remember, no static defense at 6 o'clock makes it a very, very viable target. But Krankendau still not benefiting from too much of the tier 2. And is he going to step a little bit too far forward? Remember that those Lyrilisks, as they're starting to descend, all the Vagrants stacking up, the Lakizilisks are going to run roughshod over them, and a couple more units have leaked through to deal with the paltry defenses at the 3rd base. But 6 o'clock has finished. Arbuz has not had to cancel it just yet. Where are the reinforcements for Krankendau? He doesn't have anything really coming. He's got a bunch of them idle over there, and Krankendau, I think he maybe tunneled a little bit too heavily on the micro in that fight. And now, Arbuz will clean up the last of the Zerg units that are of consequence in that area. He has not had to cancel his 6 o'clock, so they're even in bases yet again, with the worker count only up by 7. At this point, it's not very consequential. Krankendau does have a pretty steep army. He is going to spend down his considerable bank, going for a lot of Tetzoricors, a lot of Lakizilisks, but where is the support? He doesn't have a Matravel Nest. You think about being able to catch some of those units using the Lyrilisk bounces if they're enchanted by the Matroleth, the formerly known as the Queen. It now has an aura that allows any unit around it to apply ensnare on its attacks. You think about that in conjunction with the bounces, think about how much of a debuff that would be. But Krankendau doesn't want to think about that. He's going to charge forward, and Arbuz was a little bit slow to start reinforcing this position. So as an army pivots to the right ramp, that's going to fall away. The pylons should end up falling here, but instead Arbuz wants to maybe take a sweet time trying to go for a surround. The Tetzoricors are coming. They do deal splash damage, and they have lifesteal. So the more targets they hit, the longer they stay alive, and you can see they are just not dying right now. But with enough focus fire from Arbuz, he should be able to clean this up. He's routed most of the Zerg units that are inside that 6 o'clock position. He has more and more units coming out of the rally right now, and Krankendau, he's got to go back home and start spending down his bank. There we go, but it's more of the same. If this composition doesn't do him wonders, then I'm afraid that Arbuz could theoretically run away with this. But he still has not been able to saturate the 6 o'clock. Despite having the same worker count, definitely not at the same efficiency. And Krankendau is going towards the top right for an expansion attempt, I think, unless that's just a patrolling Zeth on the minimap. Busy focused on dealing with this. We do have a Demiurge out to steal some of this melee units. Yeah, indeed, that's going to be a couple of those going down. Now, the Lakizilisks are here, but when the Demiurges start coming out, and I would say even before then, you need to think about putting down a Mutat Spire, grabbing some sniper strains like the Protathalor, maybe even just a bunch of Mutas to try to dive in there, but I would definitely advise the Protathalor in this kind of situation. Instead, Krankendau is thinking about just going for a little bit of a contain with the Lakizilisks. He is starting to get a little bit of damage to the worker line, but instead he wants to commit to charging forward. We've got multiple Demiurges out, though. I don't know that that's going to work out the way that Krankendau wants. We still have not had any Ovulettes for detection to deal with the witnesses, and more of them are coming out, but the Pariahs are just standing on top of them. They don't even need that detection over here. And a couple of the Zerg units have indeed been mind-controlled, but most of them are going to go ahead and evaporate for all sides. Now the Lakes are going to be the ones that are stolen if Krankendau is not too careful, and it looks like indeed he will not be. So there you go. Arbuz has lost his 6 o'clock. We have Quasilisks turning into Lyrilisks on the field. The witnesses kind of left by the wayside. Pretty big stack of units, but again, it's the same kind of army, and that's something that Arbuz, you got to give him credit. He has been upgrading his army, doing different things with his army, getting Demiurges, continuing the Pariahs, continuing the Vagrants. Sure, there's plenty more Protoss units than that you could see, and a couple of Dragonids are unfortunately going to get caught over here. But at this point, I love this. Going for Hierophants, debuffing the enemy units. taking their strength, using them for other purposes, repositioning his stolen Lychysilisks, which will take more damage because they've been mind-controlled, but they also, I mean, it doesn't matter for the Lychysilisks too much, but they move faster in the presence of enemy units. If he wanted to reposition them and run them towards his enemy, he could absolutely do so at a much faster pace than his opponent. So that is something to keep in mind. Hostile Lychysilisks, Krankendau might have to think about detection finally. His own tools used against him. Not able to move any further forward. Now making a couple of Iroliths. There we go. That's going to help him detect. That's an evolved version of the Ovolith, so that will definitely help. Now, what can you realistically do from this position? As long as Arbuz remains underneath his Lakis, they're being enchanted by the Pariahs. When the Pariah kills a victim or damages a victim that then dies, their corpse is consumed to increase the attack speed of allied Protoss in the area. So that's just another thing that is in favor of Arbuz in this fight. But Krankendau has done a counterattack brilliantly at the 3 o'clock position. Many units and a couple of little outposts here just to slow him down. Even if you end up stealing some of those army with the Demiurges, it doesn't matter too much. All of the workers have died over here, and suddenly Krankendau is up by a significant number of workers. There must have been, most of the workers that Arbuz had must have been over there. That is a crazy amount to end up losing. A non-trivial number. We've got some Hydras coming. We still have the Lyrilisks out. No Bactylisks just yet, but still a plenty over there, and I feel like Arbuz might be on death's door. Losing this base is really important. I mean, technically the Nexus is still up, but I don't know if that really counts to the same degree. Now, most of his ground army has fallen. He still has the Lakis providing a little bit of a buffer there, stolen over. We've got more of them going to go ahead and burrow down, and that Demiurge is dangerously close to death. Now below 100 HP. You can see Krankendau trying to see if he can pick it off here before the other units get controlled, and even if they do, does it even matter? I mean, we've got the Lakis just cutting through everything. Oh no, one of the Iroliths was stolen. Well, so much for that, but yes, indeed, finally, that Demiurge will die. We do have another one in the area, so that can still help him out. Unfortunately, these Lakis just kind of hopscotching over here. More units coming on in. There's the movement speed increased Irolith. You gotta watch out for that. All right, the Pariahs will help clean things up here. But again, Arbuz, he's resetting the workers over in this location, has lost a lot. Remember, the one Krankendau Lake is over here should be spied by that witness, or maybe just not. And still, we don't see any other bases coming out. No 6th base for Krankendau. He's only now going for his gas caps in a couple of these locations. And now he's thinking, yeah, maybe I should have expanded during all of these attacks. Probably would have helped me out. I obviously have the money. Making a lot of Lychysilisks. But dude, at this point, you're capping your geysers. Okay, you're going to have that gas come in a little bit later on. I would have loved to see Protathalors at this point. I think with Protathalors specifically, they're these very long-range units. Anytime you hear a unit with Thalor in the name, that is a suffix that indicates it's a siege strain. And look at this. We got an Arbuz Lakis and a Krankendau Lake. I love that. If you guys tune into some of the tournaments and some of the other games that have been being played lately, you'll actually notice that we see the Lychyzilisk graphic visibly there. Oh, and just as soon as the Wardens finish, of course, they help put that poor Lakis down. But yes, you gotta watch out. Watch out. The Demiurge could just steal that detection away, and then you wouldn't have anything. In fact, it might still be focused down here by Arbuz if he's a little bit savvy there. Gotta watch out. Krankendau not necessarily familiar with using it in the middle of combat, I think. He's just going to charge forward with it, and it will end up being taken over. Very unfortunate there for Krankendau, because he won't be able to detect the stolen Lakis. But maybe it doesn't matter for this particular fight, because Arbuz is fighting away from that. A lot of his units getting caught up there on that movement instead of being able to join the fight directly. That feels like a bit of a misplay. He's got a lot of idle workers up there at the 3 o'clock position as well. But you know what? Finally taking a 6th base here. And I think fights like this, games like this, really show you why we needed that little art update that I've done recently for all the Zerg units to show a single frame of them while they're burrowed. Not only do you get to see what unit it is, but you also get to see the player color. So you can instantly look at it and say, oh, okay, that's Arbuz's stolen lake is, instead of wondering why Krankendau hasn't unburrowed his lake is or whatever. So that's definitely something. Now an 8th base coming at the same time. Okay, or is that 7th? Yeah, that would be 6 and 7 over there. So top right, natural is being taken by Krankendau, and the bottom left 3rd is also being taken. So we'll see. I mean, he's definitely continuing to fight steadily. We do have depleted minerals in the main and the natural for Arbuz. This base starting to deplete as well. He's going to have less income as a result of that. That's one of the reasons why this base is so important. When resources deplete in Cosmonarchy, you end up getting 25% less resources, which isn't nearly as much as it used to be. It used to be half. I used to go from 4 minerals per harvest to 2. And I'm not so sure which one is actually better for gameplay, but to me, either way, it's something you've got to study and know as your opponent, as a player. You got to know that your opponent, in this case for Krankendau, he's like, oh yeah, my guy's definitely pretty low on money. You know, he's not going to have that much, and I would say that is definitely the case. So let's see. I mean, he's got a lot of Lyrilisks out here. Tetzorkor is kind of zoning away most of the rest of the army. Sure, some of them get stolen, but you can still use them pretty adeptly, I would say, in this position. Unfortunately for Krankendau, he's kind of falling away with most of his army, but not all of it. And I'm not really 100% sure why he's falling away like this. This is probably the thing that you have to watch out for the most in StarCraft 1 styled games. Cosmonarchy is no different. When you retreat, you have to be really watchful about how you retreat, because your units are not going to be fluid like StarCraft 2. So you really do need to babysit them a little bit on the retreat if you're going to do that. And clearly Krankendau wanted to look away just to macro up. He was setting up stuff at the top right natural there. And as a result, I actually think it might have cost him that fight. I don't think Arbuz was favored in that position whatsoever. I will say Krankendau still needs to add a couple more units to his repertoire as far as unit types, but it looks like the sheer force of will, the macro engine behind this force is going to be able to overwhelm and force Arbuz into a bit of a fallback position here. He's got a bit of a hit squad down at 6 o'clock, but he's not able to actually take that base just yet. He's going to see what he can do in the meantime. Oh, this Demiurge is kind of out on its own, all by its lonesome. That should be focused down here, but again, the armor for it does take a while for it to break out. And indeed, that little hit squad is going to be dealt with. Krankendau doesn't have a crazy amount of forces. He is going to tier 3 and finally adding the Mutat Spire. So hats off to him for figuring that one out, putting the pieces together. He's cleared out most of the Lakes, but look at this last one, has dealt 3,000 damage, and most of that, I'm sure, has been for Arbuz. Losing out on the detection, not ideal, but he gets away with a lot of Lyrilisks, which are, of course, a pretty big asset. And with the Spire done, what is he going to do with that? Is he going to go for the Protathalors? Is he going to wait and go for Sovraleths directly, which do cost a bit of gas? He doesn't have a lot of Vespene right now, but he has been setting up a lot of idle workers over here, but crucially, the gas has been saturated. Going to go ahead and hopefully take another base pretty soon. Right now, it doesn't really look like he's doing that just yet. Not saturating the 7th base there in the bottom left. And back to his own side. Okay, well, the battle lines continue to evolve. And speaking of a whole lot of static defense, Arbuz not making the same mistake twice at 6 o'clock. He's a trooper. He's hanging in there, even though he's been down in the dumps a little bit when it comes to the economics. Really, I think he's showing the cost efficiency of the composition he's chosen, and he's been adding Hierophants, like I mentioned, just more reliable procs of things like the... Oh, look at this, repositioning the lake is over there as well. Nice. You know, one of the things that he's basically showing, in my opinion, from what I'm seeing over here, is that the Hierophants adding the more reliable procs of Ascension, obviously slowing units to help him pick off more units on the retreat. And, of course, the Pariahs, he's steady production on the Pariahs, right? Hasn't skipped a beat there. I do think he could add even more. We could definitely have seen at this point maybe like an Argosy for Magisters to increase weapon range, or things like the Demiurge, which already has a really strong range. Also could have seen stuff like a heavy play towards Didacts from the same structure. But he seems content with the current composition he has, and admittedly, he was very much behind. He still does not have an Aquifer added on to any of these positions. He's going to go ahead and take a stab forward. There is a lot of Zerg here, but most of them are pretty low in the tier. I think only a couple of Lyrilisks make up the higher tier units here, and remember that Arbuz is rocking tier 3 and tier 4 Protoss at this point. So he's going to be a very happy lad engaging with this fight. A couple of Lakes are helping to deal with the Vagrant Shaft, but look at the Demiurge count. It's up to 5 now. Each one of those representing, I think, something like 350 Vespene, so heavy investments there. We've got the Protathalors. Finally, they are going to start helping and start sniping down most of this force. So these units are starting to be mind controlled, but that position is going to be abandoned as the Demiurges fall on back, and they're forced back by the equivalent range of the Protathalor. You got to watch out. You don't want to be letting those units frontline. Again, you got to babysit your units when you're retreating as well for the same reason. A couple of them get killed needlessly. But remember, the tier 3 has been achieved by Krankendau in full focus, full force, as he thinks about taking that bottom left natural for his 8th base. And so, yeah, I'm happy to see Krankendau, continuing to randomly, I guess, but erratically achieve some element of focus on the macro. It does feel like in these kinds of situations, you're in them so seldom that when are you really realistically going to be trying to take the fight to your enemy. Like, if you're thinking to yourself, okay, I'm here and I got to make a base, I got to do this, I got to do that with my tech, I got to upgrade my units, so many things to juggle. But if you get so little practice with that, because most of the games don't go this long, then what kind of position are you really going to be in, right? So at this point, I'm happy to report we are going to see Alcagelisks. Tier 3 has been achieved for Zerg. What are they going to accomplish with this? That's the question. But as this bottom left natural is taken, the Vagrants scouted out. Are they going to force a reaction from Krankendau? Looks like the answer is yes. Oh, stealing another lake is definitely going to be big money. Krankendau forced to fight in a position he does not want to, as some of the static defense from the high ground of 6 o'clock is starting to crack shot after shot in favor of Arbuz. But as this fight falls a little bit further away, Arbuz has stolen these Lakizilisks to deal with that left-hand flank, but the Protathalor stack coming in from the north is going to be able to topple slowly, dealing with all of these units. Now some of these Lakizilisks are once again going to be mind-controlled in favor of Arbuz, thanks to his aggressive positioning by the Demiurges. And where is the chaff? Get those Lakiz burrowed, my man. That was Protathalors need to kite backwards before it's too late. As they fall on back, doing their moving shots, the front line turning against Krankendau. He takes those last couple of parting shots to clear out some of the Lakiz, but he's gifted 4 of them. We saw how much value Arbuz had from 4 of them before, but getting many more Protathalors, getting the Alcagelisks out. And you know what? In this position, I mean, if you're Jack Yelensky, you're like, dude, make the Sovrolets. You got Protathalors. You can make Sovrolets. But the gas does not seem to be there just yet. Top right main has been taken. Bottom left natural has been taken. And Arbuz is not having it. The static defense already set up over here. And look, another Lakizilisk has been gifted on over. Definitely a nice little favor. Oh, he's going to follow the Demiurge. No, okay, he sticks around there. There you go. Gets it burrowed. A 5th one there. Nice. But the Alcagelisks are out, and you do have to watch out for that. I mean, if they're in low enough number, they're not going to be able to overwhelm things like the Demiurge, but the Protathalors are here to help with that. The Lyrilisks and Zorius just kind of occupying everything else. The Alcagelisks doing their best to deal with the rest of the chaff, as the Protathalors focus down another Demiurge, only down to the original 5 that we had before, but these Alcagelisks are being focused down by all the Vagrants. Is this going to be enough? Is Krankendau going to be defeated at Tier 3 yet again? This is the kind of thing that Krankendau has had to deal with in the past, and it's not been a nice look for him per se, but he does have a really nice static defense setup over here. If this is going to be attacked into, I do fear for Arbuz's flank. But where is Krankendau's response? His timing, not exactly ideal. These Scortrits are eventually going to regress back into circuits and then be dealt with after the fact. Gotta watch out for that. Get that lake is burrowed again. And there we go. The Protathalors continuing to do their best. You really gotta watch out for stuff like this, man. Like, these kinds of Protoss armies can be surprisingly efficient. But top right is continuing to come online. We've got Gazithalors out, which turn into the Alcagelisk, but the Gazithalor also has its own pretty good single target damage. Oh, look at that. Catching 2 Vagrants for the price of 1 there. Another force being dispatched towards the top right. We don't have great defense over here. It looks like 4 Lakiz, 2 of which are unburrowed. And Krankendau is going to go ahead and take this opportunity to stab forward, catching workers on the transfer. No actual nexus being set up there in the bottom left just yet. Do you really want to attack up this ramp? I don't know if the answer to that question is yes. We've got more units coming out every now and then, some workers transferring, gas cap happening. Remember, there's a whole hit squad from the top right for Arbuz, so most of his army is not in one spot right now. Air units doing their best to deal with this Demiurge that's trying to hold the line, but as profane as it is, it's not going to be enough there. Ramp is now open for business, but not very many ground units left over to deal with it, and Arbuz pulling the trigger on the top right at the same time. We've got a cross-map fight on our hands as, well, the Protoss army is starting to get managed. These Gazithalors, the Alcagelisk, oh, it finally ends up falling, but the Demiurges have mostly been destroyed as well. It's all Vagrant City with just a couple of heavier, higher tier units, and that will be enough to deal with this Hatrosk in the top right. Arbuz with the cross-map attack. He is not yet fallen. Only 1 Demiurge remaining on that side of the map. And you know what? He's taken the top right third. Krankendau, having lost some ground, no static defense in the top right main. Is it even going to be checked by Mr. Arbuz, I'm not 100% sure. He's thinking about maybe going for his Nexus. He's got a stolen Zoryus occupying the position there. A lot of Alcagelisks and Protathalors, etc. are repositioning to see if they can contain and catch this army. We've even got some stolen Droleths, but it's given time for Krankendau to start setting up some defenses, and I don't think it's going to hold per se, but it might be enough just to slow this attack force down and get them completely wiped from the map by this rampaging army that is moving over to accept them. Battle workers, it doesn't get a kill, but you know what? In my heart, maybe it will. Oh my god, the battle worker got a kill. I can't believe it. Those workers are going to go ahead and burrow. Here comes the attack force. Where is the counter push? There really wasn't much left with that defense force that Arbuz was going for. Here's the Lake is. They need to get burrowed behind these circuits that are going to go ahead and finish. And there is not really that much micro happening, really on either side, I would say. But the Pariah is just trying to clear out some of the workers. That's not going to be too significant, as Arbuz does have a significant worker lead, but not as many bases. And you know what? Krankendau is holding down the fort with the Alcagelisks behind. He's got a significant number of units over here. He can shut down the top right third as he secures the top right main for himself, and that will be it. Arbuz has a single hostile Droleth and an Irolith over there. That's pretty much it for him. And you know what? You gotta watch out, because these Alcagelisks can get closed in on. Where is the chaff? There's a bunch of Hydras and Protathalors. A nice flank of the Alcagelisks. So much damage coming out from them. They do have that extra bounce attack, and they are going to focus down the Pariahs, although they're not as good at dealing with that as they are at dealing with crowds. But let's see. He's trying his best. The Lake is in the back, not really getting engaged in the fight right now, as the Demiurges are starting to fall. Only 2 of them remaining, and Arbuz is still trying to press onward over here. I think that's a mistake, but he trusts in the Vagrants. Let's see if he's right, because many of these are indeed low. The Alcagelisks starting to get focused down. The Vagrants, oh, if only they had a little bit more armor penetration, but it's not to be, and the Lake is on the high ground are going to be enough for now. We've got some workers coming on over, because why not? Who needs workers? You can give them to your opponent if you want. Indeed, they will be sniped out, the turncoats. And the top right natural stays alive for Krankendau. I mean, it's being reset. The bottom left main, some static defense up here to shoot at the workers once those finish. A huge cavalcade of workers being moved on over. And you know what? I'm not sure what Krankendau is thinking at this point. I'm not sure what ArbuzBudesh is thinking at this point. But we are going the distance with this game. And I really think, you know, if Krankendau experimented with a couple extra units, if he had the Sovroleths out, if he was getting more and more of them, I feel like that would have been a good option to pair with these Alcagelisks, because really what you need for them, especially versus the Vagrants, versus the Demiurges, and if those Hierophants get onto them, well, God help you. I do think you do need a significant number of some sort of chaff unit. And what better chaff unit than the Sovroleth that replicates itself on the field of battle? Now, over here, there was a battle worker, and it died bravely. Some Zets are going to charge over here to try to deal with these static defense structures. But look, the response is going to be an Arbuz army. Oh no, hash. Well, I don't think it mattered at this point. I'm guessing there's going to be one final push. And we do have another push coming in indeed. Arbuz going to see if he can step on this force that's already been weakened by the static defense in the bottom left main. Oh, yeah. It's... I think that's Ramen being misleading or something. I'm not sure about that one. But I didn't even realize Ramen was in here. Yeah, Ramen was spectating. Can you believe that? All good then. Just obs. Game continues on. Krankendau trying his best with these Alcagelisks. You know what? He's lost this bottom left base. He has hardly any defenses elsewhere, but I think he will be able to crush this position from Arbuz. I don't think Arbuz can really deal with anything over here. I think the Alcagelisk count of 15. Yeah, man, if you weren't making you know, something to deal with that, like Didac Stasis or, you know, Empyrean stacks or something like that, man, I don't know what to tell you, but it's not going to be good. Not going to be good, my man. You need like Empyreans and probably like Manifolds or Bargus to increase armor pen. Then you'd be talking. You'd be cooking, but those are units that Arbuz does not either have access to or want to use. He is going to go ahead and try to catch some of these Alcagelisks, but the stack is too damn high as the bottom right Nexus is going to start to fall. Big bank for both players, especially for Krankendau. Kind of shows you how much of an economic advantage he had. And he's fighting underneath the Avenged and Ascended Vagrants as the Demiurges try to close the distance, see if they can control some of these. A lot of them are starting to die. Where's the focus fire from Krankendau? Well, it doesn't matter, I think, because the rest of his army is still alive, dealing with everything else. And that is going to be more than enough. We have all of the Vagrants starting to fall. We've got one Demiurge left standing. with one more in production. Maybe one more just popped out. I'm not sure. Yeah, it looks like one more did just pop out, but I don't think it's going to be enough. I'm pretty sure Krankendau has achieved the death push. He doesn't have anything else in production, so he better hope that he's achieved the death push because he's been tunnel visioned in. He's trying to set up some stuff over here, it looks like. And GG is going to be called. Arbuz simply cannot hold versus the tier 3 Zerg. And that was after surround after surround. My man. Protoss not able to do it. Not able to stay alive. I think in that game, obviously Arbuz was much faster at updating and specializing his army. But one of the things that I always look at is, you know, are you responding specifically to what your opponent is making? And for a long time, Krankendau was not. He did start to field the Protathlors, but I think it was much too late. I actually would have preferred you get the Protathlors before the Demiurges even show up, because they add value for sniping things like those Pariahs that were giving a lot of mileage for Arbuz in the early stages, and they can even snipe some of the backline units, like those Hierophants that were filtered in a little bit later. But, you know, I mean, those are more of a mid-table unit anyway, but you think about like when the Dracodons were starting to snipe all of his Lakes, you know, there's things that the Protathlors would have definitely helped out in. And so I think Krankendau could have done a better job of updating his army, but hey, he won it in the end, so he can pat himself on the back for that. Lots to learn from in that game, and lots to learn from in general. So I hope you learned a thing or two about PvZ watching this replay, watching this cast over. We'll be back very soon for some more action. I very much look forward to having you guys for Tyrant's Tale. It's going to be an exciting time to watch some of the best players we have next weekend, but also some of the up-and-comers that are going to try to qualify into that main event very soon, just in a few days. So see you guys then. GG's, and we'll be back with more Cosmonarchy.